Good morning to all of you all. Welcome to panel 2. Let me introduce myself. My name is Sourabh Gupta. I head the Trade and Technology Program at ICAS. Just as a background, I think it's important to know that it bears remembering that, the first shot of the great power rivalry that the national security strategy of the Trump administration that they introduced in December 2017, the first shots were fired in the trade arena. And that came via the Section 301 tariffs which were placed on China. And it was literally the day on which the negotiations with regard to how to manage those tariffs failed, which was an ongoing process, but was kicked into high gear at the G20 summit in Buenos Aires. And they went into what was called a 90-day phase of trying to resolve those tariffs. That discussion failed, and the technology war between the US and China can literally be dated to the day that negotiation failed. Now, yes, there was an issue with regard to ZTE. There had been a deal done in advance. But the important point out here is, in the first panel, we talked a lot about need to make deals, et cetera, and Trump is a deal maker. But we also need to bear in mind that when deal making fails, what might happen thereafter, and that might again happen in term 2. And as I said, the technology war or technology competition or selective decoupling, as you say, however one might frame it, literally dates back to the day on which that negotiation failed, and the US then passed its ICTS order, and then it was Huawei and foreign direct product rule, and the Biden administration, of course, has deepened it subsequently. What we thought out here was we can touch on trade, we can touch on the science and technology dimension. We dropped the trade dimension, even though I know for Mr. Trump that is the biggest issue, and that will be the big issue going into in Trump 2.0, at least in the initial phases, and that we would try to have a more coherent discussion of the science and technology dimension. And I would say that we have excellent speakers to talk about that science and technology dimension out here. Among the topics that we will be talking about are the major Biden-era rules, regulations which have been made, export controls, strategic trade controls that have been issued. What are they? How is the Chinese side adjusting to it? Particularly in terms of on the ground commercially, what are Chinese organizations, entities doing with regard to that? And are they finding workarounds? Where does that stand? One of the important discussions that the Biden team and the Chinese side have had over the past year and a half has related to what is called the Science and Technology Agreement. We are going to have talk about that Science and Technology Agreement and also important developments that have happened in that regard, and important developments which have happened very recently in that regard. Another issue that we will talk about today is with regard to China has gone in a big way after its 20th Party Congress in terms of reorganizing the structure of its science and technology ecosystem top-down model, how it's going to go about doing this reorganization. That's already playing itself out. We're going to have an expert speak on that issue. And of course, we're going to also discuss in terms of what can we expect what Trump might do, the Trump administration might do on the technology competition dimension. And it's stacked, actually, with quite a few people who know technology, frankly, starting with Mr. Musk and people, Silicon Valley people who have been doing AI who have been doing AI for quite a while. So it's not that the Trump administration, populist, blah, 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 whatever it is green behind the ears in this regard. So I think there's a lot of dimensions to focus on. We're going to focus on all of them. We have our 4 speakers. Each of them is going to give initial remarks for about 10 minutes on topics, and we'll see where we go from there. We'll have a discussion phase. We'll have question answers. The bios are all there with you all. Let me just very briefly introduce them. First, we'll have Mr. Paul Triolo go. He's Trustee Chair of Chinese Business and Economy at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and currently Senior Vice President for China and Technology Policy Lead at Albright Stonebridge Group. Next, we'll go to Xiaomeng. She is director at Eurasia's geotechnology practice, has done a lot of work on data governance, privacy, big tech, and artificial intelligence, digital trade. Third, we'll go to Denis, Dr. Denis Simon. Denis has been in U.S. China relations for a very, very long time, expert on international business and technology. More than 4 decades of experience studying business, competition, innovation, and technology sector in China. He's been Executive Vice Chancellor of Duke Kunshan University in China and founding member of the experts group of the U.S. China Innovation Dialogue organized by the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy and China's Ministry of Science and Technology. Finally, we'll go to Song Sao, and he's a professor at Nottingham, Ningbo, China. He has done immense work in the area of science and technology policy and innovation policy in China, published extensively, and would be an excellent position to talk about the reorganization that China is doing with regard to its own science and technology ecosystem. So without further ado, Paul, I think Paul's going to speak right from his seat, so please go ahead, Paul.
Thank you, Sourabh. Great framing. This work? Okay. Yeah, no, great panel, and I think I want to associate myself with comments earlier in the earlier panel, which I thought was really good. I was struck though by the fact that the technology piece didn't really come up there. I think there was one mention of AI. There was no mention of TSMC or Huawei, as far as I can tell. And then I think again we'll come back to Taiwan. I think the centrality of Taiwan really is now the big difference is technology and semiconductors, and we have to acknowledge that. So what I thought I would do is just quickly sort of try to outline how we got here and where we are in the case of technology being sort of at the center of U.S. China relations, arguably. And we have here, something like more than 100 years of experience in sort of tracking this and understanding this and living this issue. It's hard for me to conceive of how we got here. When I landed in China in 1988, I could barely make a phone call to Xi'an, and now we're talking about a race between the U.S. and China to see who is going to develop artificial general intelligence, right? So that's the sort of span of time we're talking about here. Not that long, actually, but within that short span of time, the technology issue has really become, I think, something we have to talk about in U.S. China relations. So when Secretary Blinken put the technology issue at the center of U.S. and China relations with this align, invest, compete policy, which was mentioned earlier, I think by Professor Yu, that was not that was a long time in the making, right? I mean, you can go back, as far back as you want, but that was something that took a lot of time to develop, and it's all about technology, right? Align with allies on controlling technology to China, invest in U.S. reshoring of advanced manufacturing of semiconductors, and then compete across virtually every segment of technology. That was accompanied shortly after Secretary Blinken's speech by what I call the Sullivan Doctrine, which put advanced compute, biotechnology, and green technology as the core pillars of national security interest to the U.S. government in a way that had never been expressed quite like that before. I mean, there had been other actions in those spaces, but that was an articulation for the first time by a senior U.S. government official about what mattered in terms of technology and what mattered in terms of in terms of U.S.-China relations. So we have to unpack what that means. And so I think there are these two broader issues at play here that are important to grasp. One is economic development, right? And the idea that technology and the digital economy are now at the center of economic development. And so it matters, for example, who is building your digital infrastructure. That wasn't really the case, until arguably, the late part of the last decade. The other is national security, right? And as more of a country's economy and political and social activity goes online and is supported by that digital infrastructure, it's not surprising that technology and who is building and running and owning and controlling the technology becomes an increasing focus of national security concerns. Now, one can argue that we're now at a point where everything is about national security, right? Everything related to technology in a way that, again, hasn't always been the case. But that's sort of where we are. I think somebody mentioned this morning the securitization of the relationship, and certainly that's the case in the technology sphere. So if we go back this period 2010 to 2020, 2010 to 2020, this is really where all this happened. And again, the actions on both sides, we can just point at things like the Google Aurora intrusions in 2010, and then the Snowden revelations, for example, in 2020, to show that both sides were already, even then, focusing on this issue of digital infrastructure and its importance going forward for national security. And so then we have all sorts of issues on both sides. The Chinese establishment of the Cyberspace Administration of China in 2012, the National IC Investment Fund, Made in China 2025, which of course is still with us, the Digital Silk Road, the China's National AI Development Strategy in 2017. On the U.S. side, of course, too, we have toward the end of that decade, we have starting in the Trump era, and late in the Obama era, this concern about, for example, Chinese acquisition of technology companies in the U.S., the sort of revigoration of CFIUS, and looking at inbound investment, and then of course now we're looking at outbound investment. And then we have the entity listings of Huawei and others in the Trump administration, and then things like the Clean Initiative, which crystallized the idea that the U.S. now cares about who's building its own infrastructure, digital infrastructure, and those of its allies. And then as we get into the Biden era, really what has changed significantly from the Trump era is the centrality now of artificial intelligence. And I think that was mentioned once this morning, but I think it's really important to harp on this, because it's really in the Biden era that AI has sort of come of age, and then all of the subsequent controls on technology, export controls particularly, and outbound investment controls and data controls are really now all coming within this meme of artificial intelligence, and who is going to win this race, this seeming race on AI. I think my view is it's a false meme. I have an article coming out soon which will touch on the dangers of making the AI race into a zero-sum game, because I think it leads to bad places on all counts. But here's where we are. So if we look at the series of export controls, for example, as an example, that started in October of 2022, October 2023, and now last week. So we're having an interesting timing of a conference between two sets of controls that are really critical. The one last week really was the final sort of volley of the Biden administration to close loopholes around particularly semiconductor manufacturing for advanced node ICs, which translates into AI GPUs, which could be used to train AI models in the cloud, which could be used for military applications, right? That's how to think about last week's controls. And then next week, we're going to see a new control, an export control framework for AI diffusion, which is going to be a really unprecedented attempt by the Biden administration to basically control where AI is developed globally, and to divide the world into those countries that can get advanced AI GPU servers at scale, and those that can't. And again, this is all directed to sort of with this overall goal of slowing China's ability to develop advanced AI in the context of this sort of race to AI. Now, there's all sorts of collateral damage that this causes, and I think I've written extensively on this topic, and the bottom line though is we're in a new world here where we don't really know the full extent of the collateral damage, for example, to industry supply chains. China reacted, of course, very badly last week and quickly by putting bans on critical minerals. There's a whole lot of other critical minerals and rare earths that could become part of this, which will be further disrupt supply chains. So there's sort of a commercial piece of this that's really important to sort out, and how bad that gets. And the Trump administration is going to have to quickly probably deal with that issue. This week, the Treasury Department is raising this issue of the bans with the Chinese counterparts during the Financial and Economic Working Group discussions. And then there are a host of other pieces of collateral damage. and if you look out and extend this out, and again, the Trump administration is going to have to deal with this, Taiwan is really critical because I've written that it's sort of naive in the extreme to think that China is going to sit back while the US runs ahead to develop advanced artificial intelligence with the idea of being dominant militarily, politically, economically, when the hardware infrastructure base for that AI is sitting 100 miles off the Chinese coast in Taiwan. So that changes the thinking on this whole thing, right? And my view is that nobody seems to be thinking about this on either side, right? The implications of this, because this is going to be the fundamental issue that the Trump administration is going to have to grapple with. Because if you extend this out and the U.S. continuing to cut off, for example, Taiwan from and TSMC from mainland companies, the calculus on all sides is going to have to change here, because the big difference from all the documents that were discussed in the first panel, the three communiques and the Taiwan Relations Act, the big change since 1972, 79, 82 is, in fact, the fact that Taiwan, unlike Vietnam or South Korea, North Korea, Taiwan is at the center of the global economy in a way that none of those other issues were. And so grappling with that head on is something that's going to have to happen. I haven't seen a lot of examples of it yet, sort of out of the box thinking on Taiwan, but that's really where we are right now in the technology domain. And so the Trump administration and the incoming officials are hopefully thinking about this issue, but that's going to be I think the focal point of the new administration when it comes to China. And somebody mentioned the Valley and Elon and there's also a strong contingent in the Valley that's of conservative venture capitalists that are all talking about China as a threat. I just read this morning the head of the couple that is driving Anthropic, which is one of the leading AI companies, talking about how democracies have to dominate the development of AI as opposed to autocracies. And so that meme is out there. That's another piece of the equation, and these are issues I think that are going to be really tough to grapple with, because it's a meme that's sort of hard to put back in the bottle. So let me stop there.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, on that cheerful note, I will carry on the discussion. I was tasked to talk about the future of U.S.-China competition in the next few years. I'm afraid that I have to continue the theme Paul started, to break the bad news first, and then talk a little bit about how to deal with all that mess we are ahead of us. First of all, I want to say I see greater uncertainty of U.S.-China tech relationship under Trump. Things are more likely than not to get worse before it get better. One of the key indicators of this trend is the direction of travel from Congress. If you are looking at what they have been proposing, there are dozens export control reform bills popping up, suggesting some level of bipartisan support of a more expansive view of export control tool. This is a core issue that have been driver of the bilateral tech tension for the past few years. And if you look at the GOP-led efforts, their plans are more ambitious, more aggressive than what the Biden administration has been doing in the past few years. And if you're looking at Project 2025 or the GOP platform, they echo the same theme. I think that's from the congressional perspective. And then if you pivot to Trump's political appointee, looking at the people he has appointed so far, we try to put these appointees in different categories. So far, we come up with four China advisors, four type of China advisors: trade hawks like Peter Navarro, security hawks like Michael Watts, ideology hawks Stephen Miller, and Marco Rubio. And the first type is less hawkish. They are more pro-business. They are slightly more business-friendly. They are the Wall Street type. That's Elon Musk and Scott Bessent. I think if you look at the number on both sides, it's very clear that the China hawks will dominate the Trump White House in key technology issues. But I think the end results in terms of where we are heading for next year really depends on how key positions shake out in the next 2 months or so. We're still looking for more names to come up and people being put into place in key positions, and how their power dynamic of Trump will shape up. We may see a very wide range of China tech policy depending on who take these key positions. But so far, our assessment of the overall U.S.-China relations, our base case is called relationship breakdown for next year. That means the trade hawks will push maximum decoupling. Security hawks will attempt to cross China's red line and leading to a freeze in bilateral relationship. We assign 45% probability to this case. And then the slightly lower probability goes to our secondary case called managed decoupling, which is a scenario we have been staying for the past 2-3 years. That means the less hawkish voice will lead on trade and increasing the chance of two sides reaching a deal. We assign about 30% probability for this case. I think the doomsday scenario that Paul talked about, if US or Taiwan leadership cross the red line with China on Taiwan and Beijing decide to take escalatory military action, and that leads to blockade type of disruptive cases, we gave that 15% chance. I don't know if Paul is agree. He says it should be higher. And then there's 10% left for the most optimistic scenario, we call it grand bargain, that if Trump decide to strike a deal with China, we are very sure that Beijing is very keen to seek that. But at this moment, the initial signals point to still our base case, because China has been wanting to build a connection channel to the Trump transition team. There are diplomats coming to the US. They will try to talk to a lot of the people in the room, I think, and then ask for introduction to the key people who are on the transition team. And also recently, the past 2 weeks, a few US scholar delegation went to Beijing and they have seen a few Chinese leaders who also send a message that we want to open a discussion. But so far, our assessment is that has not materialized. I think at one point, people will say Elon Musk may take on that role, but we haven't seen evidence suggesting that's taking shape yet. And then also the export control tightening on mineral exports towards the US supplier is another sign. And China's probe of NVIDIA, the AI chip leader for antitrust, is another signal. I think it's a shout cross about to the Trump team that remind him that we want to talk about this issue and we have tools that we can leverage. This is a very scalable tool. We can retaliate. At the same time, it opens the door to conversation. We want to negotiate now before you get into office. I think this is the loom and doom part of my remark. And hopefully, I will turn into a more positive note at the end of this, which is that I want to talk about how do we weather the storm, how to preserve the remaining connections between the tech communities on both sides of the Pacific. I think number one is people-to-people exchange. I think one thing that does improve quite a bit under Biden administration is the communication channel, whether it's climate change, whether it's economic policy, whether it's military-to-military leader communication, law enforcement channels, AI dialogue. I think there are so many people-level communication. It doesn't mean that we can agree on certain policy or will change the trajectory, but we understand each other better to avoid misunderstanding and mismanaging unintended consequences. If going forward, the formal track tools are not as feasible as before, I think a smaller in-person meeting and official behind closed doors, I think the two communities should try to achieve those, to preserve those relationships. And when we are talking about the next 4 years after Trump, I think that will plant the seeds for green shoots in the long run. And then the second point I want to say is that the tech community should continue to innovate. Tech breakthrough will energize bilateral relationship. Had we not have the recent AI revolution in large language model, we will not have this extra channel of dialogue between the government on AI governance and share our concern about long-term risk, whether it's existential scenarios or catastrophic outcome, unintended outcome. I think that's one channel that would not exist had technology had not leaped forward in the past 2 years. There's also so many track tools on AI. I think that's another opportunity to strengthen these connections and improve our understanding of each other. The faster companies can innovate and move forward to provide more development and growth opportunity to the world, it's harder for the regulatory schemes and geopolitical forces to capture them. With that, I will finish my part of the talk.
Thank you. Denis?
Since I'm Professor Simon, I will take the lectern. Well, I'm going to change the tone a little bit with some very positive news, actually. So my job is to talk about the Science and Technology Agreement itself. And I've been involved with the Science and Technology Agreement since 1979. I actually drafted a number of the background papers that went into the selection of the fields for which the U.S. and China decided to cooperate. So that goes back a long, long way. And in particular, over the last year, thinking about the renewal has become somewhat of an obsession for me. I've been heavily involved. There's not almost a day goes by where somehow I'm not talking to Beijing or someone in DC about the status of this agreement, including at 7 o'clock this morning. At 7 o'clock this morning, just to give you the cut to the chase, there is some probably very good news. I can't release it because the State Department has asked for it not to be released until 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. But I can tell you tomorrow should be a happy day. Or if it's not tomorrow, it'll be early next week. And that the details will come out, and I think that this is very, very good news. It bodes very well. It also is tied to this decision by state to relax the control on travel to China from Category 3 to Category 2. It will help more students and more scholars also be able to go, particularly scholars from public universities, which has had the hardest time getting the permissions to be able to travel to China. And this is all related to collaborative research, which is tied not to the S&T agreement, but also to the education accord that was signed in 78, 79. And so when you talk about the STA, you can't forget that university-to-university collaborative research is a central part of this relationship, and we have to think about that as well. So after being signed in 79 and selecting the first fields, et cetera, this agreement has been renewed pretty smoothly every 5 years, including it was renewed in 2018. Most people don't realize, but under the first Trump administration, under the cover of darkness and without any fanfare, the agreement actually was signed again. It added a little bit of language about IPR protection, which is to be expected. But it was indeed renewed. No high-level ceremony, no high-level officials. It was due for renewal again, as many of you know, in August of 23, but it was twice extended, and it became clear that somehow a fundamental revision of the agreement was needed to capture what I call a whole series of new issues that have come on the table, what is clearly not even thought about or considered in 1979, and were not very much in vogue in the 1980s or for the most part, in the 1990s. These issues have included now data security issues, personal security issues of reciprocity and equal access for scientists, cybersecurity, of course, and also the whole big elephant in the room, the national security concerns, particularly accusations that have been suggested that China has used the STA as a way to capture technology that has moved from the civilian sector to its military sector. So these negotiations now have been going on since August of 23, and there's been a hope, I can honestly say, that there would be a new agreement put together. And approximately six weeks ago, maybe a little bit longer, one of the most vice ministers came to Washington, again under the cover of darkness, and quietly visited the necessary people, I think, in the U.S. government. And I think that it was decided that they would move ahead with this agreement. So while things, are moving in a positive direction, and as I said, I wrote my speech literally you know, 10 hours before this news from this morning, a new agreement is waiting to be signed and become official. Technically speaking, we don't have any agreement anymore. It was extended twice, each time for 6 months, and therefore it actually expired in August of 2024, and nothing was done since that time. They've been talking to one another, but literally nothing has been done. So what happened this morning is very, very good news. And we can assume, because of that, that this bulk of new issues has actually been finalized, that they've actually come to agreement on the core technical issues. What is data security, and all the kinds of things that are associated with that. And the only question has been whether the political will has existed on both sides to sign a new agreement, something that is different than the original '79 agreement, but something that contains more guardrails and more controls so that both sides can feel comfortable. Chinese scientists visiting in the United States, not being hounded by the FBI, and Americans allowed to go about and not feel that they might get detained if they step in the wrong place in China. So opposition to this STA has been very, very real, and it's been very substantial, as some of you, again, who follow this, particularly coming from the Select Committee for dealing with the Chinese Communist Party in the House. The committee has issued a number of protests and even sent a very strong formal letter opposing any renewal sent to Secretary Blinken. The State Department, the Office of Oceans, Environments, and Sciences is the key agency on the U.S. side, and the Chinese Ministry of Science and Technology, the Department of International Cooperation, as the lead agency on the Chinese side. Though, as we know, many participating agencies have played a role in this agreement over the last 40 years. Over 30,000 American scientists have participated in projects. The number of projects we can count is well over 1,000, and they've involved somewhere between 30 to 40 different fields of cooperation. The Biden administration's policy of high fences around narrow areas has not helped the agreement get signed. 4 major arguments have been driving the opposition. The first one, basically, is that, very simply, the accusation that China has benefited much more than the United States, that it's been a one-sided agreement. Now, anyone who knows what the state of Chinese science was in 1979, 1980s, even the 1990s, the thought of there being any kind of parity between China and the United States would have been a pipe dream. And so, as Paul even suggested, and others, there just was no reason to even consider that somehow China was coming from behind very quickly, and before we knew it, it would be catching up. So that idea is a little bit antiquated. The second opposition issue is that China's used the STA to divert this so-called civilian S&T knowledge into their military. The third is that simply China has not played by the rules. You know, Mike Lampton wrote a book in which he said there are 3 Chinas: China as a rule taker, China as a rule maker, and China as a rule breaker. And this idea of China as the rule breaker basically has pointed the finger at China for everything you can imagine: unequal access, IPR theft, lack of reciprocity, and as I heard in Beijing a few weeks ago, that even all of their new security laws, data security, cybersecurity, has a degree of opaqueness to them that makes it hard to understand what's going to happen if indeed you do step in the wrong place. Moreover, we have to recognize that China, as a rising science and technology power, wants to use these relationships, not only with the United States, but with multiple countries around the world. Caroline Wagner and I have written an article looking at all of these agreements that China has signed, and what you see in the process is the buildup of a force of diplomats, of S&T diplomats now, that are stationed all around the world in the Chinese embassies, and also are assuming senior positions in S&T related international organizations. So, but one of the problems is that every time somebody sees a gain for China, it's also viewed as detrimental to the United States. It's like a 0-1 world in which we're living. Good for China, bad for the United States. Good for the United States, therefore bad for China. And that's the game that has been played. So for the last 7 to 8 months, I've been involved in a project really designed to highlight what you might call the win-win not Chinese double win, the win-win mutually beneficial aspects of this 40 years of collaboration. One of the most interesting things that I found, and this is true in education, and this is true in science and technology, neither the Chinese side nor the U.S. side has put together a comprehensive compilation or aggregation of all of the case studies to highlight the successful achievements that have come out of these two relationships. The wins that have come from the education relationship, the wins that have come from the science and technology relationship. So I've started mapping these. I literally have gone through thousands and thousands of pages of documentation looking at what actually has gone on in this. The closest we come to is some work that Pete Suttmeyer did a few years ago for the China Economic and Security Commission, in which he tried to also provide a little bit of that assessment, but nothing of this sort. So I would argue that the absence of a comprehensive document covering the benefits to the United States in particular of 40 years of cooperation has left the pro-agreement people basically in a very bad place. They've had no ammunition to bring to the battle. And there's even over the last 5-6 years ago, when this information would have been really relevant, very little information has surfaced about it, and I think this is a big problem for all the obvious reasons. So let me just provide very quickly a sample of just a few areas where explicit mutual benefit from the STA has come, in which U.S. has funded and the Chinese side has funded these projects. So first, joint climate studies, including carbon capture, carbon utilization, and storage, leading to emissions reductions that were particularly useful for American companies to meet their regulatory requirements on emissions regulations. Second, joint work on clean energy through the CERC project, the Clean Energy Research Centers, which had led to advances in battery storage, renewable energy, grid design, and even spillover into electric vehicles. So again, if the Chinese have run faster than us in taking advantage of that knowledge, that's not anything that they've done sneakily or conspiratorially. That's just better processing of the information. Joint work, the third one, joint work on the Human Genome Project has led to advances in cancer genomics, agricultural genomics for improving crop production, crop productivity, and also areas of now linked to personalized medicine even. A fourth one is joint work on data science has led to advances in natural language processing, computer vision, and even robotics. And last, my list is very long, but joint work on new materials that bolstered U.S. industries in helping to advance even semiconductor and battery technology, all tied to both consumer electronics and renewable energy. And these are all can be well documented, because every time, let's say, there's a National Science Foundation funded project, the PI, the principal investigator, must produce a final report in which the results of the research have been documented. But nobody has really gone into those and covered those. Same for NIH, same for Department of Energy, et cetera, et cetera. By the way, I've talked to the Chinese about this, and they also sort of put their face down and they say, why didn't we think of this? Because it has both propaganda value, but it also has real value in documenting this. That's why, for example, when the STA renewal first came up, over 1,000 U.S. scientists signed a letter coming out of Stanford University supporting the renewal of the STA. So our scientists, in terms of mutual benefit, et cetera, have come to believe in this very strongly. The most significant case that is often cited is the case of the use of folic acid for pregnant mothers to reduce birth defects. I thought, okay, this is not such a big deal, so I went out and I started to look at this. This is a big deal. Through the use of folic acid, we can reduce the incidence of what are called neural tube birth defects in pregnant mothers by 85%, just by taking a little supplement of folic acid. And this has had impact not only in China, but in the United States and also all around the world, particularly in many developing countries. Dr. Godfrey Oakleek, who's called the father of folic acid, worked in CDC, and his Chinese counterpart, Li Zhu, was a epidemiologist in China, and they worked together in collaboration on this project, which shows you what can happen. So my sense is that if we can document the breadth and depth of these cases of mutual benefit, et cetera, we can better highlight the real substantial value that comes from this. And just so happens that this week, Caroline Wagner and Tommy Schur from Lund came out with an article in Issues in Science and Technology in which they argue that collaborative research activity actually produces better research results than Lone Ranger activity. In other words, the synergies from the collaboration push science ahead in ways that Lone Ranger research does not. So I don't want to leave the impression that the current situation regarding the STA, at least up to now, has been a 0-1 proposition. There are a series of, again, just like in AI, efforts underway in health, agriculture, space, AI, and even climate change that are going on as a kind of track two series of mechanisms that are trying to say, look, we're not ready to disengage in all of these areas. We need one another. And the absence of an STA agreement would take away the symbolic political value that comes from the fact that both countries and the governments and the leaders in these countries are endorsing the idea that collaborative S&T or work together is good for the United States and good for China. So let me close by just making a couple of final comments. If you look at this arrangement and you look at its benefits, it's clear that both the United States and China have enjoyed value from working together, and that why we need to think of the risks, and the risks aren't zero, but in some ways what we may have done overall is we may have exaggerated the risks and understated the benefits. And it's easy to see why we understated the benefits, because there's nowhere we see this compilation of benefits together. But the following things have proven to be true. First, there is a strategic value to this science and technology collaboration that comes from simply pulling together the expertise, the resources, and the knowledge. Two, there is value in the mutual learning that has occurred. Today, China is ranked number 11 on the Global Innovation Index, and according to statistics, it's the number 2 spender on R&D in the world. So there's a lot of money, there's a lot of talent, and there's a lot of capacity. And the evolving parity that comes from both countries working together means the cost of disengagement would be much, much higher than the benefits that we would be foregoing. Third, addressing global challenge issues becomes more coherent and more concerted if we can work together with the Chinese. Any new STA could help us streamline our ability to respond more quickly and more effectively to the global challenge issues that are on our agenda. And then finally, the Science and Technology Agreement enhances the United States' ability to strengthen our competitiveness. Because again, if the Chinese have gone from being an innovation laggard to somewhat of an innovation juggernaut, and I don't want to exaggerate that either, but at least in a number of fields, China is equal to the United States, if not having surpassed, or has a set of complementary capabilities, that if we do not engage with the Chinese, we are destined perhaps to fall behind in fields where China is moving into a leadership role. So these are all things that might happen. And so I would just urge you, a new agreement is going to happen. I'm pretty sure from what I heard this morning. Will it be a perfect agreement? No agreement is ever perfect. But think about it this way. Would it be better to have an agreement, even if it has a couple of issues that have not been resolved, than to have no agreement and to basically de-link with one another and allow that relationship to fall apart? So in closing, basically, I think what's going to happen is that we will definitely see an announcement very soon, clearly before the end of the year. And I'm hoping that when the Trump administration comes into power, it won't simply tear up that agreement, but will use it probably, my guess would be, in a very selective kind of way. Some projects moving forward and other projects having to be delayed. But at the end of the day, we will hopefully from this agreement have a better roadmap for going ahead and working in areas where we might have a red light, yellow light, green light system that says these areas are good to go, these areas are closed, and these areas are a good maybe, and we need to explore those. Thank you very much.
Okay, I've been asked to comment on the institutional reform in science, technology, or maybe of education and relatedly in talent. I mean, following what Denis has just said about the agreement between the US and China on science, technology collaboration, as Denis just mentioned, that the progress of China in the areas of science, technology, innovation has been benefited significantly from the globalization and the internationalization of science, technology, innovation. China has been taking advantage of the benefit offered by globalization and internationalization. During that process, actually, China also has engaged in the reform of its science and technology system, which is actually one of the first among the reform program in China. In 1985, China started to reform its science and technology system. Basically, there are a couple of issues to solve at the time, try to raise the efficiency and effectiveness of the science technology system. At the same time, try to improve the connections between scientific research conducted at the labs and the economy, try to solve the so-called the problem of the 两张皮. And going forward, but when some of the issues have been resolved through the reform, at the same time, the government, including scientific leadership and political leadership, have increasingly realized the importance of have those kind of institutionalization of the governance system in science technology at the highest level. So that over the years, especially try to solve the issue in terms of coordination of activities at the different government agencies which have a mission on science, technology, innovation. So those kind of leading group, 领导小组 kind of mechanism has been introduced and have been improved over the years. Initially, we know there was something called the leading group of science, technology, and education, 科教领导小组. At the time, actually was chaired by Premier, including Premier Erwin Jiabao and the Premier Li Keqiang. Into the Xi Jinping's leadership, especially in 2018 and 2023, there had been two biggest institution reorganization at the central government level. The first one actually was in 2018, which involved, among other government agencies, is the reorganization of scientific and technological governance system, including the merger of the National Science Foundation from an independent body into the Ministry of Science and Technology. At the same time, the government also moved those government agencies in charge of attracting foreign talents to work in China from the Ministry of Human Resource and Social Security to the Ministry of Science Technology, so that Science Technology Ministry became a very important government body, not only in distributing resources, because I mean at the time the Ministry of Science Technology, by absorbing the Ministry of the National Science Foundation, have control a significant amount of resources distributed by central government. At the same time, it also became a very important body in terms of utilization and attracting domestic talent and international talent. But things had changed in 2023 when another institutional reform actually was introduced. During that time, the organization not only had the state level, but also at the Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party, where basically you see the new organization was proposed and eventually founding, which is called the Central Science and Technology Commission, 中央科技领导中央科技委员会. If we take a look at how this reorganization of the science and technology leading kind of mechanism at the central government level, we basically see the party actually took over from the state council in governing the science, technology, innovation coordination mechanism. Because previously, as I just mentioned, the leading group on science, technology, and education was resigned within the State Council. But now you have this new organization, which is under the Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party. But if we take a close look at the constitution of this particular body, under the Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party, we see the person in charge of that was Ding Xuexiang. Not initially, some people guess would be President Xi Jinping. But if we compare this special kind of organization with the leading group of science, technology, education within the State Council, we see in that particular kind of apparatus, the leader was a premier Wen Jiabao, premier Li Keqiang, etc. Right? Basically, the Li Keqiang and Wen Jiabao was basically they were number 2 or number 3 within the Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party. So we see some sort of downgrade in terms of the person which was in charge of this particular and very important kind of affairs in China. At the same time, we see also there's a downgrade of the Ministry of Science and Technology. As I just mentioned previously, the ministry was in charge of distributing a significant amount of state funding for science, technology, and innovation. But with this kind of new organization, the Ministry of Science and Technology actually moved some of the resource distribution kind of body to other government agencies, including the NDRC, Ministry of Industry and Information, among others. So that the Ministry of Science and Technology eventually became, according to the current kind of mission and function assigned by the Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party, become kind of office in charge of making science policy and organizing bigger kind of science and technology programs. Especially under those kind of new kind of mechanism called Xinxin Juguoti, is new kind of whole of the nation system. The role of the Science and Technology Ministry will become more important in this respect, but its function its function and especially power associated with its kind of resource allocation and the resource distribution will be diminished significantly. So we still don't know whether those kind of new organizations will have significant impact on the program organization and for policy making going forward. But as I just mentioned, those kind of institutional change happened within 5 years, right? Initially there was a change of the central kind of lineup in charge of science, technology, innovation in 2018. And then 5 years later, the central leadership say, central leadership realized that the initial kind of reorganization probably didn't work out, so that another intervene from the top level try to reorganize the governance kind of mechanism of science, technology, innovation. Along with that change, recently at the central government party and the state level, we also see kind of establishment some of the new kind of organization, including something like National Science and Technology Advisory Committee and the National Science Technology Ethics Committee. And with regard to those kind of reorganization or new institutionalization at the central level, we still don't know too much about the composition of their members. We still don't know, how these kind of organizations has pushed forward and carry out the mission assigned by central leadership. Under the kind of global trend in terms of open innovation and open science, there has been a lot of kind of lack of transparency, lack of openness in the operation of science, technology, and innovation. Additionally, as we all know, in 2006, there was a big kind of medium and long-term plan for the development of science and technology for the years between 2006 and 2020. Another kind of 15-year plan for the development of science technology for 2021 and 2035, has been worked out. But the detail of this particular 15-year medium long-term plan, again, is still not available for the public to understand how the central government and other part of society has been invested into what kind of project, what kind of institution, etc. Those kind of information is still not available for the public. Another issue I have been asked to comment is that what kind of future in terms of science, technology, and innovation will be under the sanction of the U.S. government against China. I have some sort of metaphor describing the progress of innovation, science, technology in China in the past 40-some years. Basically, Chinese scientists or Chinese people, China as a nation has been working on like two legs. On the one hand, you have seen a significant indigenous or domestic efforts from China side, which including increasing investment in science, technology, innovation, including the reforming of the science and technology system, including the development of human capital, human resources, including the things like expanding of higher education, among others. But at the same time, China has been also taking advantage of the benefit offered by globalization by collaborating with international scientists, especially those scientists in the US. And Chinese government and Chinese people have been sending out students to study at the international frontier of science. And at the same time, China as a whole has been also taking advantage of the foreign direct investment, including those kind of high-end kind of R&D activities brought by these multinational companies to China. At one time, those multinational enterprises contribute anywhere between 10 to 15 of China's total R&D expenditure, which is very, very significant. Because of that, China has been making significant progress in science, technology, and innovation in the past 40 years. But with the kind of sanction from the U.S. government and maybe some of the U.S. allies against China, I would pursue. The one of leg is not broken, but at least there was some sort of kind of negative effect on that part, so that China's progress in the future in the areas of science, technology, innovation will be slow than in the previous 40 years. Of course, the gap between China and the advanced countries in science, technology has been narrowing. But we still don't know whether going forward the gap will be enlarged or that the gap will be shrinking significantly. But that's we have to watch and see. I think these are the things I want to comment, and I will welcome questions and other comments from the audience. Thank you very much.
We have about 10 minutes to go, so let's have some questions. Please go to those things. I thought just before I start, I'm going to fire out two quick questions. First, one to Paul and one to Xiaomeng. To Paul, the question is, you talked of the role of technology with regard to the Taiwan situation and that how it can change the calculus. Can you just flesh it out a little more of how that calculus changes? And okay, let me give a question to Xiaomeng also right now, but Paul, you can go first. Question to you is, would you like to hazard a guess what happens to TikTok under the Trump administration?
Oh, good. I'm glad I didn't get the TikTok one. Look, on Taiwan, the issue is twofold. One is the continuing U.S. export controls, which we'll see next week again, new controls that will target essentially for example, TSMC's ability to support Chinese companies' designs being manufactured at TSMC. So the extent to which the US controls are cutting off Taiwan from mainland companies is a significant dynamic. It began with Huawei in 2019, but it's accelerated, and now many more companies are covered essentially by US extraterritorial export controls. And those affect TSMC in particular because it's the global leader in foundry services. And then the second issue is AI. Again, I mentioned that the fact that with the troubles, for example, that Intel and Samsung are having in the foundry business, TSMC's role in the global AI development stack, if you will, is even more important. So even though the US is trying to onshore, for example, some advanced manufacturing, even by 2030, the capacity of TSMC in Arizona, for example, will be single digits of what's available in Taiwan. And then when you throw in advanced packaging, it becomes even more, Taiwan becomes even more centric. So again, if the justification for all the controls coming from the U.S. government is to prevent China from developing advanced AI models and capacity, but the hardware basis for that is on Taiwan, that adds, in my view, significant additional risk onto the calculus behind the U.S., China, and Taiwan in terms of how to peacefully resolve that. So for example, if those export controls are in place, even a peaceful reunification of Taiwan would not be supported by the US government, presumably. Nobody will talk about that. But if those export controls are on and there's a peaceful reunification, then China would presumably regain some control over those fabs in Taiwan. And that would be unacceptable given that we're now well down the road in terms of trying to prevent China from having that advanced node capability. So that all of those pressures bear on the future status of Taiwan and on how that happens either peacefully or not. And I think that's something that needs more discussion.
Xiaomeng?
To the TikTok question, I will begin by saying TikTok has launched a very sophisticated campaign in the US. They activated every legal and policy advocacy tools at their disposal, and they planned really well, performed it really well. Their CEO, Zhou Shousi, in front of congressional audience, did a superb job, even if you compare his performance at the technical level to like the GAFA CEO's performance in front of members of Congress. I think tactical level, they done a very good job. But the political reality is that I think their case has a very, very narrow path to get verdicted. I think at this point, the company have appealed. They want Supreme Court to take the case, to delay the case. But the ban will kick in on January 19th. I think theoretically, there is a scenario where if the app stores don't take down TikTok on January 19th, Trump and his attorney general can decide not to enforce a ban. I think legally speaking, that's a potential possibility. But still, in that case, I think who is really in the position to push against that decision? I think Congress can potentially file a lawsuit on this, but is that a very politically probable scenario? I don't know. I think that's their only chances to hope Trump can go into office and decide not to enforce. But the base case is still, I think Trump does nothing, and the legal case goes through, the ban will get enforced.
Thank you. Please go ahead. Please introduce yourselves first.
Thank you very much. My name is Jan Willem Blanke. To not complain too much, English speakers call me Bill. I'm perhaps the only, one of the few Europeans in the room, and maybe that's why I don't understand it. I have an economic background, but worked 20 years for the European Union as a diplomat. And maybe technology is not my strongest point, but I cannot connect the very doom and gloom vision of the two technology experts on the ground and the fairly positive story of the professor. Could they elaborate very quickly and explain to a non-technology guy? Thank you.
Okay. What I also thought, Vikram, Michael, I think let me take your questions also because we'll be otherwise running out of time, and we'll try to get as much of them answered. Go ahead.
You should. There are also two people there.
I will go to them too. I will go to them too. I'm coming to you all too.
I'm Vikram Nehru from Johns Hopkins University. One issue that hasn't been mentioned yet is technology competition in space. My understanding is in 2010 there were 36 Chinese satellites. Today there are 1,000. 60 of them apparently have maneuvering capability, which go from upper to lower geosynchronous orbits that allow them to park themselves very close to U.S. satellites. The departing deputy head of Space Force said, we drive our satellites as if we're going to space. Our adversaries drive their satellites as if they're going into combat. And we talk about confidence building measures in the South China Sea and elsewhere, but what is your view as to what sort of things need to be done with regard to confidence building measures in space to prevent any untoward incidents that might lead to any conflict? Thank you.
Sure. Michael?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, in light of the comments that Denis made on the renewal of the S&T agreement, from each of you, how confident are you that the U.S. and China are in fact arriving at clear definitions, or at least reasonably clear definitions, of the boundaries between national security and non-national security technologies? Is there any progress being made on actually trying to define what are the boundaries here? Because right now we're facing a situation where it seems like more and more technologies are being viewed as dual use. And it just blurs the entire issue so that almost anything becomes national security. Do you share that gloom and doom view, or do you think there's actually progress in making a clear definition?
Sure. Why don't you all go ahead with answers? I'll come to you all, to both of you. Go ahead.
So as far as space, as far as space is concerned, I think over the last 3 or 4 years, space has become a subject that the U.S. has now decided we better do something with the Chinese. Now, you may remember, because of June 4th, 1989, even though space was one of the areas of cooperation and there were some activities, the United States decided as a response to what happened in Tiananmen Square that we would curtail all space collaboration. And that pretty much stayed that way until the last few years. I was at Arizona State University, and they had won the project for the Mars rover. And they were told by NASA officials, if there's a Chinese citizen within 500 feet of that building, you will lose your federal funding. So that's how serious this was. And this goes back to 2014, 2011, around that period, that 3-year period. But lately, as we began to look at the scenarios for future conflicts, and particularly in space, and Chinese enhanced capabilities for shooting down satellites or whatever they might do up there, we began to recognize, sort of like an artificial intelligence, we're not going to necessarily help them do things in space, but we are going to try to set some norms about what equals good conduct in space, so that we are not stuck with space trash or things of that sort. We're not setting up strategic positioning for satellite, removal and things of that sort. So I think space still has some possibility to go forward, if only in the motif of what's happening in AI. And the last question was
about the seam between non-military.
Oh yeah, the non-military. So without going through detail, because I can't do that, but the new agreement will set up some processes in place for national security review and national interest review, so that in both cases there will be agencies before any projects could move ahead that will be in charge of reviewing these to make sure they're not touching on any sensitive national security issues. And then, even beyond that, they will have to be reviewed for national interest contributions. And if someone thinks that, okay, maybe this is not a a big security issue, but we don't want to see the Chinese gain positioning for some political reason. We still could decide that we don't want to enter into that agreement. So those mechanisms, from what I understand, are going to be put in place to try to deal with some of that. In the earlier drafts of this agreement, they had agreed to 4 technology areas in order to narrow the scope of the agreement, because the first agreement was unlimited. So, and that included, again, according to my understanding, climate change, food security, global health, and one other, may have been clean energy or one other. But those were seen as not innocuous, of course, because as you said, anything can. But they were seen as ways in which both the United States and China could benefit, and the world more largely could benefit as well, and we would go ahead with that.
Yeah, and let me pile onto that one. I think the challenge here is the Jake Sullivan sort of small yard, high fence, which is, I think, now generally discredited as being small, where he included advanced compute, which includes semiconductors, manufacturing, AI, quantum computing, biotech, which is a huge range of things, and green tech. So that's if those are all of high national security concern, that's a pretty big yard. And then the challenge is also between sort of industry views of this and, for example, government views. So just a simple thing seemingly like advanced semiconductors. The definition in the Commerce Department export controls of advanced compute, or advanced node semiconductors is 14 and 16 nanometers, for example, for logic. The industry does not consider that advanced logic, right? The industry considers 3 and 2 nanometers to be advanced. And so if you look at the new control that came out last week, they mention advanced node semiconductors 84 times in there, right? It's all about that. But none of the companies, none on the entity list, are doing work at what the industry considers advanced node semiconductors. So it's a sort of a disconnect here about what is off limits and what is not. That has created a huge issue with, for example, U.S. tool makers who do have a view of the industry and what is advanced and not, and they're being told they can't ship equipment that might be used at 14 or even higher nodes because it might contribute at some point to advanced node production. So it's in each of those different 3 categories, I think, there is an agreement on where the boundaries are, and we're sort of, crossing the river and feeling the stones and adding new things as we go, in some sense.
Can I get the questions really, really quick? We're already out of time.
Yes, I have a question about logistics technology. So I want to ask, China has really failed in many areas for Belt and Silk Road initiative, like Pakistan has not been good. Even the Bangladesh, Nepal is still going on pretty well, not very well. So I would like to talk about like airlifting, products that are being manufactured in China. I think US has a lot more control on the pilots that we have, and China hasn't really done much on like having airports, airstrips. They're I think probably 250th on the world ranking. So do you think it's time for pilots in US, which is a high income earning job, to actually go to China and get products instead of using the ship, the ocean route? What is your perspective on that level?
Yeah, thank you. This is Qingguo from FC, the World Bank Group. So I have a question regarding the EV, the electric vehicles. So a lot of Chinese companies are in the leading position of the electric vehicles, and even some US brands, they are relying on Chinese on the battery capacities. So CATL is the largest in EV battery manufacturing, and it said last month, open statements that it will build a plant in US if Trump administration opens the door. So my question is, I want to ask your view on this, like the Chinese company's intention to build plants here in the US. Do you expect that the Chinese will be allowed to build plants, or there will be a big threat and they will be rejected? Thank you.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Thanks. Trump wants American-made goods by American labor for American workers. So is there a scope for investing by China out here and having that protected as a kind of, instead of a phase 1 deal, a new deal?
Let me just quickly tackle that one. It's a complicated issue. I think the administration has put in place, obviously, tariffs on Chinese EV imports. The issue of building plants in the U.S., I think, is still will still require a lot of discussion and attention. I think Trump has expressed initial interest in doing that, probably under the influence of Elon. But the issue of, there's two separate issues. One is batteries, I think, which may be more tractable because they're not part of connected vehicles. And then there's EVs themselves, for which the US, for example, is putting in place a new rule that will be issued probably in early January in its final form, which will restrict the content for software and hardware of connected vehicles from companies with ties to China. And so that's going to be a complicated issue in terms of coordinating that rule with Chinese companies coming into the US and building full up EV factories. I think in theory Trump will probably support this, but he may not appreciate the complexities around the connected vehicle issue. But I think the battery issue seems to be more tractable. CATL just signed a deal with Spain to build a factory in Spain. And if the US is going to have an EV industry, then the participation of Chinese companies, particularly in the battery supply chain, will be critical.
You know what, I think at this point we need to cut it off. I think we're going to go for lunch. Nong, why don't you come and make the announcement? Thank you very much to all our panelists.
Thank you, Sarah. So it's time for lunch. The buffet lunch is served already outside of the boardroom. And then we'll be having a lunch speech during the meal. So go ahead. Thank you. Is it? Oh, this is yours. It's a